Hey everyone, welcome to the Tech and Real Estate Podcast, where we bridge the gap between real estate and technology. I'm your host, data scientist Ariel Herrera, and today we have a special guest Vikas Gupta, who's the CEO of Azibo, a property management platform. Vikas has 15 years of experience in early stage tech startups. He has also worked in real estate marketplace LoopNet and started his career in McKinsey and Company, where he focused on insurance. Now Vikas is helping landlords and investors with Azibo and holding impactful real estate conversations on his own podcast, Hacking Real Estate. Welcome to the show, Vikas.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, super excited to have this conversation today as I myself am looking for a better property management software to use in comparison to some of the tools that are out there. So before we dive into your company and how it solves the need for landlords today, would love to hear a little bit more about your background, maybe where you grew up, where you went to college, and how you ultimately landed in the real estate space.
Yeah, happy to tell you. So I am a Los Angelino through and through. I grew up in the suburbs of Los Angeles. I went to UCLA for undergrad. Um, Very much spoiled by the LA weather, the proximity to beaches, the proximity to mountains. I did leave. I did actually leave. So after undergrad, I moved to Chicago to work at McKinsey and Company, as you said. And then after 2 years there in their analyst program, I worked at LoopNet.com, the commercial real estate marketplace, from 2006 to 2009 in San Francisco. And after 5 years away, I realized, you know what, LA can't be beat. So I moved back. I've been back here ever since, working for various early stage startups and now at Azibo.
Excellent. And did you always know you wanted to get into the real estate space or kind of found you?
It kind of found me, to be honest. I didn't really have like a great sense of what I wanted to do when I was an undergrad, other than like I wanted to work in business, whatever that means. And then my junior year, my cousin, who was a few years older than me, and also worked in business, suggested, "Hey, why don't you look into consulting? I think you'd enjoy it. You seem to like learning about all sorts of weird things, and you get to do a lot of different things in consulting." And so I looked into it and I said, "Hey, this sounds fun." And so that's how I got into consulting. And then when I was in consulting, we're working for predominantly Fortune 100 companies. I did a lot of financial services work. I enjoyed financial services. I enjoyed consulting at the time, but I realized it wasn't the career that I wanted to have. I didn't enjoy working for Fortune 100 companies. So I thought to myself, all right, go back west, get out of Chicago, at least make your way to California, a little bit closer to home, and work in technology, because moving fast, which was not sort of my experience in Fortune 100 financial services, and for good reason. I mean, it's not a knock on them. There's a lot of reasons why they can't necessarily move as fast as a 30 or 50 or 100% company. So through the network, I got introduced to LoopNet, and got to spend a very interesting and exciting 3 years there. Um, I didn't really know it at the time because I didn't have like any good basis of comparison. But in hindsight, it was an exceptionally well-run company. And so like a great experience to have in my first sort of like operating company. And they created an amazing role for me where I got to do a little bit of everything on the business side. So I got to see everything from how a technology company runs by what in hindsight was like a very highly capable management team. And then I got to learn about a lot about real estate. Um, and this was, gosh, this was what, 15 years ago at the time. And so I think now it's fairly commonplace to think, hey, like I want anything, I'm going to go look on the internet for it. 15 years ago, or 16, 17 years ago, a little bit less common. And certainly of like, I'm going to go buy a strip mall, like I'm going to call my broker, as opposed to I'm going to go on the internet. And so I think I got to see sort of both sort of the promise and also some of the challenges of a company that was trying to bring technology and apply technology to a industry that historically has not been the most tech forward, at least from like a digital technology perspective. They're certainly very tech forward when it comes to like material science and buildings and physics and stuff like that, but not when it comes to necessarily digital technology. And I got to see like what value you can create. And I think what really became clear to me from a value creation perspective was they did a big transformation of their pricing model, and they moved from a fixed price per, per subscriber to a variable rate price, where if you had, more listings, you had to pay more. And that makes sense. But the time at which they did this in 2008. And that was not a good time to be in real estate. But they were able to raise the price on some people by 10, 15, 20x, right? People went from paying $70 a month to $1,000 a month to $2,000, and they paid it. They happily paid it. I mean, not happily, but they paid it. And I sort of got to see like, oh, like if this company in this market can take technology and provide so much value that in, the depths of this worst real estate downturn in 15 or 20 years can increase price on people going from $1,000 a year to $20,000 a year, $25,000 a year, like that's incredible. And so sort of that I really sort of enjoyed the everything about that ride. I moved back to LA. I went back to business school here, did a whole bunch of other tech startups. And then a few years ago, was looking for something new to do. And the CEO at LoopNet, when I was there, is now a venture capitalist. And he invested in a company called, at the time, Zeebo, now Azibo. And then the founder of the company, Chris Xu, was my manager at McKinsey. And so I made some phone calls, and I'm like, wow, all roads sort of lead to Zeebo. So I started working with the company, started doing some advising, really enjoyed the team, really enjoyed what they were doing, and sort of like saw the same potential for using technology to transform and really create a ton of value in an industry. And so joined as chief operating officer. And then a year later, the founding CEO, Chris, decided that he wanted to take a step back. And so he and the board entrusted me. And so I've been at the helm as CEO for about a year and a half now.
Incredible. Thank you so much for walking us through your background from diving into consulting and working on different projects to then shifting over to a more technologically focused career path. Being a part of real estate digital solutions when they were first forming, pretty much, and now being a CEO of Zeebo with some of your tech startups that you've already had familiarity with. So I'd love to now dive a little bit more into Azibo. What does Azibo solve today that other competitors maybe do not?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So you work for Appfolio. Appfolio is a great solution for large institutional real estate investors and property managers who have hundreds or thousands of doors. It's not designed, nor is it priced for individuals who have 5, 10, 15, 20 doors. And, for a long time, like most of the software enablement in sort of the property management and financial services around property management was really geared towards those institutional folks like Appfolio. So they have these software tools that let them run their business better, let them save time. Through these software tools enable, distribution of services to renters that provide them a better experience, such as building their credit through rent and stuff like that, if you're in a pre-software, I'm collecting rent by check and tracking things on a spreadsheet, like you just don't have access to sort of like the same caliber of both software and also financial services that the institutional guys have. And so that was sort of the origin of Azibo. Chris Xu, our founding CEO, he is an independent real estate investor. He has around 20 doors. He, by stint of his career, is a spreadsheet ninja. He managed everything on spreadsheets, but he's like, there's got to be a better way. And that's where we come from. And so I think what we do is we offer for those independent real estate investors, sub 200 units, call it, folks who aren't necessarily at the scale where they're going to use an appfolio. We provide them with all of those tools and capabilities so that they can run their business better in a software package with embedded financial services that is designed for their specific circumstance. So that is end to end. We have tools around qualifying and onboarding tenants, so digital tenant applications, integrated credit and background checks, leases, e-sign. That flows straight into like onboarding and financial services. So fully automated digital rent collection. So you collect the security deposit, then you can collect the rent, you do the automated invoices, automatic late fees, partial payments if you want partial payments, line item invoices, whether or not you require all sorts of, there's a ton of stuff under the hood, multiple bank accounts, like different properties into different bank accounts to keep your bookkeeping clean, all that good stuff. And then maintenance and communications. So instead of like getting phone calls and texts and WhatsApp and emails, you can centralize everything in one place, get all your tenant communications in one place. They can file maintenance requests and you can manage all the workflow within Azibo. And then when it comes time to offboard them, you can offboard them and you can send back the security deposit, move on to the next tenant. And then sort of like on top of, or like underneath that end-to-end workflow, we also offer banking services through a partner bank. Customers don't need to use our banking services. They can link third-party bank accounts and do all the rent collection and whatnot there. But if they do use our banking services, they get some benefits, including like integrated bill pay. So you can pay all your bills in one place. And all of that then like flows into the purpose-built accounting and bookkeeping for the specific customer segment. So out of the box chart of accounts that's tailored for independent real estate investors. We partnered with real estate CPAs in order to build it. You can set rules to auto tag your expenses. If you're doing your bill pay through us, like in the act of paying your bills, you can assign it to a property, classify the expense, and then all of that flows into the reporting. So P&L, T12, cash flow, balance sheet, rent roll, Schedule E tax form, all generated off of that data. Do it by property. You can organize your property into portfolios. So if you have multiple different legal entities and they each hold different properties, you can report on that level as well. All of that is out of the box. And here's the best part. It's all free. So we do not charge for access to the software because we do not think that like this core software offering should be charged for. Now, we do make money. We are a business. We have a whole bunch of different embedded revenue streams. So for example, on the tenant screening, we charge $39.99, fairly standard price that typically gets paid by the applicant. On the banking, we have a fairly typical banking monetization. So, again, like there's no catches, there's no hidden things. Like we get a piece of the interchange if you use our debit card. We get a piece of the interest rate. We charge for wires if you do want a wire, but again, all fairly standard. And then on the rent payment side, it's completely free to the owner. On the renter side, it is free if they pay via ACH. We do charge a convenience fee for card. And then we have some, as I said, some embedded financial services. And so we are a fully licensed P&C insurance agent in all 50 states plus the Washington, D.C. So we sell renters insurance through the app to renters. You don't have to buy insurance through us if the landlord requires property insurance, you can also upload proof of insurance, or you can buy it through us. We offer the credit reporting service as an optional add-on to renters that we charge $4.99 for. There's a couple of other, transactional embedded revenue streams, all optional though, but that core software offering is free.
Absolutely incredible, because I have not seen a tool today that the core features are free. And also just being comprehensive of all the things that a landlord would need. And I think you mentioned a great point of why Zeebo stands out from, say, other traditional companies that are more towards institutional buyers. But this really helps for those, like you said, under 200 units or so. So say if I'm an investor. I have 50 units. I've been doing this in spreadsheets. It's been a nightmare with my accountant and having to pull everything from different sources,
Mhm.
screening from one app, insurance from another app. I want to onboard, but what would be the steps to take? Because it could probably be overwhelming to move my current processes over. So, what are the best steps to do that?
Yeah. So we try and make it as easy as possible. You sign up for an account, reach out to our customer success team, and they will send you a spreadsheet. And you can then put all your property information into that spreadsheet and we will upload it for you. So you don't have to sit there and manually create all your properties within the application. Then, in terms of onboarding your tenant, you can either put the tenant information in the spreadsheet and we'll onboard them and invite them. Or if you want to gradually onboard your tenants, you can also do that one by one yourself within the tool. So it's very easy to use. It's very flexible. We do understand though that there can be a bit of a hurdle if you have 50 doors to like sit there and type them all in, which is why we offer this bulk onboarding tool to larger folks. And we'll do that,
Nice.
just out of the goodness of our heart to get you onto the platform.
That's great. And then in terms of listing, I be able to list across different platforms within your software? Or more
Yeah, so
so it's a
that's a
property
great
management
question.
aspect?
So today we do not syndicate listings, and I'll tell you why.
Mhm.
The reason we do not do listing syndication is because I guess there's a few reasons. One, the larger ILSs recently have started cutting off access to software like us. And so, the value of like list in one place goes down pretty significantly if like one or two things are missing, because now you're just by default going to different places. The other thing that we found actually, and we've surveyed our customers, and like listings doesn't really, like, it rarely comes to the top of anyone's sort of like feature request list. And the reason is sort of like it seems so market specific and property type specific as to
Yeah.
like what destination works the best, right? So where I live in Los Angeles, there's a huge housing shortage. So like a lot of places, they just literally put a sign out in front of the building and say vacancy. Like, doesn't ever hit the, you know, hit Zillow or rent on,
Hmm.
they don't have to. In other markets, Facebook is a big place. And then in other markets, it's Zillow or nothing. So it's sort of like,
Yeah.
it's kind of a mixed bag, and I don't really want to like build a solution that just lets us check a box, but it's not actually going to solve the real problem for our customers. So that's why we don't do listings.
Makes complete sense. Yeah, then just trying to fit a peg into a hole
Mm-hmm.
that's, not going to work out.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of management so say for the tenant side, how easy is it for them to enter in maintenance requests and for me from the landlord to be able to see that and respond right away?
So super easy. Um, so it is. So first thing I'll say, it's optional. So it is at the feature has to be turned on by the landlord, because some folks don't want like all of a sudden their tenants to be flooding them with various requests. Um,
Right.
so it has to be turned on. So if you as the landlord turn it on, then all your tenant has to do is log into their experience. And, there's a couple of structured fields to provide more context to the maintenance request. Like, is it a plumbing issue? Is it a appliance issue? Like, if it's an appliance issue, like what is the appliance? Then they have like they can enter in some text. They can upload images if they need to upload images, hit send. That
Nice.
goes to you, the landlord. You can see all that information and then you can take it from there.
Excellent. Yeah, seems like your platform really does the end-to-end work and makes it seamless. So I'd love to kind of bridge this and talk a little bit more about the data aspect,
Mm-hmm.
since with your growing clientele, you must have a lot of data at this point to really analyze some of these markets. And from a landlord's perspective, they may think, how do they assess if they're going to purchase a new property in a given area, maybe what the vacancy rates look like, or how likely someone's going to pay, how they're paying. So, do you have any information in terms of how people pay today for rent? Is it mostly ACH? Is it credit card or some other form?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is mostly ACH. overwhelmingly ACH, like around 80 to 85% ACH. We have seen, interestingly enough, from 21 to like early 23, the percentage of payments that went on card was actually decreasing. And then over the past 3 to 6 months, we've started to see an increase in the share of payments made on card. Now we don't, survey folks on why they're paying via card, or at least we don't on a regular basis. So I'm not going to say like directly attribute it to potentially what's going on in the overall macro economy, but it is interesting with, as it's been a few years of fairly high inflation and, COVID stimulus money is no longer flowing. And then student loan payments are starting to resume. So there's a lot of sort of like money being taken out that used to be coming into the economy that we're now starting to see people finding that they have to, at least on a incidental basis, finance or pick up 10, 25 days of float on their rent. So that is one trend that we're seeing. That being said, by and large, the convenience fee that we charge for card payments is lower than the late fee. Now it depends on your rent because, typically like late fees don't necessarily like scale 1-to-1 with rent, but since we charge the convenience fee as a percentage, it does scale 1-to-1 with rent. But for your average rent, with the average rent paid on our platforms around $1,500, right? That convenience fee at 2.99% is about $45. And the average late fee that's charged, we see is around $75. So you're much better off sort of putting it on, taking advantage of that, 25-day float that you get on your credit card. If you are, right? Like obviously like you can pay via ACH for free, but if you are in a circumstance where the only way you can pull together the money because something happened is to put it on the card, well, you still then have until the statement closes, and then the payment is due to pay that off and take advantage of that float while not being late and not getting hit with that late fee, saving you money, but also, not pissing off your landlord. And what we found on Azibo is that roughly 90% of rent payments are made on time compared to an industry average of around 82%. And so, again, these are all hypothetical reasons because we can't conclusively say, and I don't want to, with US data scientists, like make spurious causation claims. But I think, the combination of providing flexible payment options plus payment reminders, plus, the incentive, especially if you're enrolled in the credit boost product, like all of that, making it easy for people to pay, makes it a higher probability you're going to pay on time. And paying on time is better for everyone, frankly, right? It's better for the landlord because then they have certainty about the money and, they've got that mortgage payment every month and the bank's not going to care if the tenant's late. And then it's better for the renter because they can build their credit score and, they don't get their landlord mad at them and they save money because they're not paying that late fee. So it's sort of like, win-win.
Yeah, it works out for everyone. And really interesting how it's climbed a bit in terms for the credit card. I also wonder how many tenants pay credit cards sometimes just to get points as well.
Yeah,
I don't think the math really works out, but
no. So that's the math does work if you need to hit a bonus offer.
Yes, that's a good point. So in terms of being able to access this data to really understand some trends that are occurring, having a platform where it's really preferable to landlords because, like you said, different payment strategies or options, automatic payments, which helps to increase the likelihood of a tenant to pay. What are some other insights that you've gleaned into with the data in terms of how tenant landlord relationship is and how your platform helps there?
Yeah. So one thing I have to say is that I'm a lot more cautious about how we use our data, given sort of some of the lawsuits that are happening um, around specifically, I think, using data to drive like understanding of rent prices. Um, so seeing what's going on there, I think like we certainly have access to that data. And, as I said, I threw out a number around average rent nationwide. So clearly we know what the average rents are, and we can cut that by geography and by property type and all that kind of stuff. But I think we have to be, and everyone in this space now has to be really careful about
Yeah.
sort of like how they're using that data and how they're advising landlords to leverage that data, given that. So it's sort of like that caveat. There are, I think a lot of interesting things going on. Offhand, we are looking at sort of like lease extension and lease renewal. Because I think, again, like as landlords know, real estate investors know, right? Like turnover is expensive because you might have a
Yeah.
month or two of vacancy, and then you have to refresh the unit. And so like having a good tenant and keeping a good tenant is profitable. And in many instances, it's worth giving up a little bit of the rent increase. So again, because you're a data scientist, I'm going to be very careful about how I cite these numbers. We have seen a lift in relative to the best benchmarks we've been able to find in sort of when a lease ends, the sort of like the probability that someone's going to extend on Azibo versus the best other data we've been able to find. Now, the caveat that I'm going to say there is that the best data that we've been able to find in this space is typically stuff that is published. I don't know if it's from Appfolio specifically, but it comes out of like those types of systems where they're really looking at like institutional MFR properties, which are in many instances different from the types of properties that our customers have, which are largely 1 to 4 unit, either detached single family homes or duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. So everyone knows that the behavior of those properties and those tenants are different. I wish I had better source of data for like SFR rentals. I don't today, but at least comparing sort of like us to what we've been able to find in the MFR space, we have seen that tenants are more likely to stay. We like to think it's because they have such a great experience with Azibo and that they want to stay. How much of that is us versus how much of that is having a good landlord? It's hard to say. What I can say though is that, depending on where you look, 80 to 90% of renters want to pay digitally. We obviously enable that. That being said, like 70 to 75% of rent is still being paid by check. So there's a big gap there.
Oh, wow.
Renters do want to, I have heard this is anecdotal. Again, I don't want to, going to be very clear about my sources of information on this podcast. This is anecdotal, but we have heard from customers that the reason that their tenants are signing up to pay via Zeebo is because they like the credit boost offering and like the ability to get credit for paying their rent on time and build their credit without having to take on debt. Because otherwise, the only way you can build your credit is by taking on debt. And ultimately they want to go buy a house. But how do you the only way to build your credit is to take on debt, and you don't want to take on debt, but you want to go buy a house. In order to buy a house, you need to have good credit. What do? Well, this is the biggest expense for most people. 30 to 50% of income is being paid on rent. So get credit for it. So that's a reason. And they don't want to, lose that per se. And if they go somewhere else where they have to pay by check, that's going to be a lot harder to do. And then we all, I think there's a lot of research in this space out there that has correlated sort of like landlord responsiveness to requests, to issues as something that correlates how tenant sort of satisfaction. That just also makes sense on its face. And we'd like to think we enable that as well. So I think there's a lot of things that we enable people to do to sort of create a good tenant experience that would be really hard to do or much more difficult to do in a world in which you're collecting paper checks, tracking things on spreadsheets, and having people call you or email you or text you, that we enable to do in a much, easier for you and better for your easier and better for your renter, that we think correlates to tenant satisfaction, that, at least supports some contribution on our part towards the increased likelihood someone will renew if they are able to use Zeebo.
100%.
It's a very, very really long-winded way of saying something very simple, but I'm trying to caveat everything in front of a data scientist.
I appreciate that, but I think you're also hitting it on the nail that customer experience really matters a lot these days. Especially when these tenants, they have the options of going to these like luxury apartment rentals, for example, where they do get similar experience at times with that software that they're interacting with. So it's really imperative for landlords to give that attention as well. And what would you say to like a landlord who maybe's been in the game for a period of time? They're around maybe late 50s, early 60s, thinking about migrating to your software or something similar, but they have like resistance because they think maybe that the pool that they've satisfied for the last 20 years, their behavior is probably going to stay the same. So how do you influence those traditional landlords that we are going to a more digital world, and like this is what you need to adopt to stay competitive? How does your maybe customer service team explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the provide a better renter experience, thread, and if that's not landing, there's also the like, how do you value your time, right? And
yeah,
we surveyed our customers and on how much time they saved by using Azibo relative to doing it the old-fashioned way. And what we found is that on average, they're saving 1 to 2 hours per month per unit.
amazing.
And so if you have 5 units, that's basically 1 full workday a month. Like if you have 10 units, like that is just an absolute, like if you were to tell me that I could get something for free that is going to give me back like 1 full workday a month, like I would like run through this wall right now to sign up, honestly. So that would be my other, if it's not about the renter experience, then it's about like, how much do you value your time?
Yeah.
And again, like, look, it's free. So you sign up, try it out. Hopefully it works for you. Our customers love us, but you can just try it out and see if it works for you. And if it works, great. Like continue to onboard the rest of your tenants. If it doesn't work, sometimes things don't work, and it is what it is. But like, there's not like a huge barrier to entry to give it a try.
Great point. You're bringing the passive back to real estate investing for small time landlords, for sure.
Yep. At least we're trying
so
to.
I like to segue a little bit and kind of pick at your experience of developing startups. So as a background with our tech and real estate channel is we also have a community of those who may be real estate investors. They also have programmatic skills, and they want to help maybe more experienced investors to build out tools. Maybe it's automatic deal analysis, for example, and their vision is to one day maybe have their own startup. So what advice would you give to these individuals getting started and solving problems and wanting to build their own companies one day?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. So I think there's a few things that I would say. So like one is first, like customer segmentation, like who are you building for? And there's a massive difference between building for institutional folks and building for, your mom and pop. And then within sort of the mom and pop segment, like if that's where you're focused, like who are you building for? And there's a lot of subsegments in that. There is the different people call them different things, but we call them like the coincidental landlord. Like I owned a condo, life circumstance moved into a house, I rent out my condo. I am a landlord, but like I don't really think of myself as a real estate investor. There's I inherited property, whether it's one property, like my parents died and they left me their house, or they had 5 properties and I now have these 5 properties. But again, like I'm not, I don't think of myself as a real estate investor. And then there's the folks who are like, I am a real estate investor, and they could have 0 properties, they could have 1 property, or they could have 30 properties. It just sort of depends on where in their real estate journey they are. And the way all of those people think about real estate is very, very different. So if there's a lot of folks who I talk to who come from finance backgrounds, for as an example, and think about things the way like a finance professional would think about things. And so, but depending on what market segment you're going after, like they may not think about it that way. And that's not like a knock on them. It's just like, that's not what they care about. And so like there's people who build tools and they come say, hey, maybe you should integrate this into Zeebo. And it's like, what's the value? It's like, well, like through all this good stuff, I can improve your average occupancy from like 93% to 95%. And I'm like, that's cool. If my customer managed 10,000 doors, they could run that math and like output a dollar number, and that would be like meaningful to them. If you manage 4 doors, like what does that even mean? Right? Like it's either full or it's not full, right? Like cool. So over a 10-year period, a 2% increase in occupancy on 4 doors, the math's not right. But like whatever. So I get like 28.5 more days. Like it just like that, like that just doesn't make sense. And so it's sort of like really think hard about like what are you building for who and how do they think about things. So that's like the first thing that I would, and I think frankly like that's like the most important thing. And that's not necessarily like, that's obviously not only specific to real estate. Like who are you building for, and do they actually think about things the way you think about things, and are you actually solving a problem that they think they have? But I see it much more often in real estate than I think in other circumstances, or maybe I'm just more obvious to me after having been doing this for 3 years.
Definitely. There's so many different segments of potential customers within the real estate space.
Yeah.
And I'm in line with you in terms of starting with really focusing on who you're trying to serve and what are the most important things to them.
Yeah.
As well, I get frequently people ask, say on the data analyst, data scientist side, they'll say, well, it seems like everything's already built out there. Like, where is there like room left or piece of the pie for myself? And I also say, like, start very niche. For example, you can help a group of investors maybe automate their process of tax liens and how they invest in those within a given market. What would you say about starting niche versus starting broad, and any recommendations about that when trying to, develop solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think all other things being equal, I'd say start niche. I think that like really lets you sort of like hone in on like building a incredible solution for a very specifically defined problem for a very specifically defined set of people. Now, where you have to get careful and the art of this turns in is like, is it so niche that there's no one else or not enough other people? Which may not be a problem, because like if you get successful with one niche, then the sort of the question becomes like, how much more do you have to go do to expand the eligible market? And if the answer is like, I have to build something completely new, then okay, then it's not as expandable. If it's like, oh, we just need to tweak this one thing and it's fairly simple, then okay, it is more expandable. And then obviously most things sort of fall in the middle. So that's where sort of like the art comes in. And I think that's like the danger. And so I don't know a lot about the example you just gave about like, investors in one area figuring out how to invest in tax liens. But if it's one of those things where like that data is at like a local level and you have to go scan county records, Now, that may be something that's very hard to scale. On the flip side, that may be your moat. So it's hard to say. But that's one of those things that would be like a bit more difficult to scale to new geographic areas versus like, I just have to go file some paperwork and get approved to do something in a state, which I can pay a lawyer to do and get that done in 5 hours.
Right. Yeah, it's a great point. Think about how, if you're going niche, how it could be expanded upon. Is it a
Mhm.
small tweak? Is it not? And then from there, maybe decide what you're looking to solve.
Yeah. But that being said, like generally speaking, it is much better to be successful at a small thing and grow from there than to be like okay at a broad thing because you're not
Right.
differentiated. Because it's much easier to expand from a position of success than it is to like solve 15 problems for 15 different people at the same time.
Very, very good point. Than to be, yeah, over a generalist and not doing
Mm-hmm.
one thing correctly. So before we jump into how people can onboard and get started, want to leave it to you to uh, leave any comments about maybe where you see property management going towards in the future, overall state of the economy, technology and real estate. Where do you see the future in general that maybe you're focused on today?
Yeah. Um, oof, such a wide span of options you gave me. Um, I mean, I think, listen, on the economy front, I just think it's a really interesting time. Like we haven't, at least if the expectations are correct that interest rates remain elevated for, you know, a handful of years longer, it's not something that a lot of people have seen. Um, and so how that translates into what makes sense from a, I think if we are in a period of 3 4 5 7 8 years of elevated interest rates, then I think it's going to be really interesting to see sort of like how the market normalizes around like what new cap rates are. um that's just more of like I don't have any predictions there. I think it's going to be really interesting. In terms of technology in real estate and the future of property management, I think to answer technology from a property management perspective, I think that's really interesting. I mean, hopefully I would say that because that's what I do. But right, I mean, I think right there's a set of things in property management that are on the easier side of the spectrum to digitize, and that's a lot of the things that we do today. And then there's a set of things that are harder to digitize, but people are figuring out ways to at least tech enable it. So, one thing, for example, is showings. Like, how do you digitize showings? Well, some like, you can do 3D videos and 3D walkthroughs. That gets you a little bit of the way there. Maybe 5, 10 years from now, like VR gets you very, very close to a physical experience, at least from the ability to make a decision on whether or not I want to rent. But for
Yeah.
now, like people still want to like walk through the property and they want to walk the neighborhood. And so how do you do that, especially without someone showing up? I mean, there's a lot of investment going on into smart locks and videos. And like I talked to one guy who has smart locks on all his doors, and then he has people FaceTime him and he does like a virtual walkthrough, and that's how he can do it himself. But there's stuff like that like by and large today still is like a human interaction.
Mhm.
And that's the kind of stuff that like either you need a property manager or you are not quite the passive real estate investor. And I think seeing how that stuff plays out, because I do think that there is a lot of pressure on property managers as things that 15 years ago couldn't be easily done by the owner now can increasingly be done via technology. I think there is going to be increasing pressure on property managers to figure out ways to uniquely provide value, because some of those things today, right, like showings or maintenance or whatnot, like someone's got to be there,
Mhm.
someone's got to do it. But I think increasingly there's going to be technology solutions that make it much more and more viable to landlords who want to self-manage and be in a way that is closer to passive than active relative to today, and certainly relative to 15 years ago. And how that all plays out, I think is going to be really interesting.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I think the physical aspect may decline a bit And then maybe property management, the traditional way of hiring someone to 10% fee, maybe more so for like luxury aspect, but it gives more control to the landlord who wants to self-manage to be able to do that on their own. Other thing, just thought of talking about the future of property management that gets me excited is potential of like sensors. So when there's like those maintenance requests that at the very last minute something breaks and now it's a big expense, possibly being able to get that early on. And it kind
Mhm.
of goes into your point of having more control without needing to be there in person, but understanding the property better and maintenance in that aspect.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm trying to, gosh, did I see this on Twitter or did someone tell me? I can't remember. But anyways, at some point, information came into my brain in the recent past about someone was putting moisture sensors in their properties in places that are most likely to have leaks, because like that is one, if that if your renter is not paying attention or they just like forget about it for 2 or 3 days and there's some like water, like that can have like a massive adverse impact on the property.
Yeah.
And so they put moisture sensors and wire that up to the router, and then there you go. Oh, you know what? I was combining two things in my head. So there was that, but I was talking uh to actually a former professor of mine who owns property. And he was saying that and he's a remote landlord, but he self-manages that he has all the irrigation hooked up to a smart irrigation controller. But he was running into issues where like the tenants would change the Wi-Fi and then the irrigation would like go down and then the yard would die. And so
Oh, no.
so he just finally he like put in his own internet on a private network that he pays for,
Mhm.
and like all of the smart, the irrigation, anything else smart home that he's doing that he needs to manage the property, he just puts on that. So regardless of what the tenants do with their internet or their Wi-Fi, like he gets the control and the information he needs.
Great. Yeah, it's an interesting story. I didn't think about that, how you may need to have your own private network, make sure
Yeah.
things don't go down, because otherwise it's not really effective.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So Vikas, would love to know a little bit more about how people could reach you in terms of your own podcast that you host, as well if they want to check out Azibo on their own, how would they do so?
Great. Yeah. So Azibo, you come to our website, azibo.com, sign up for free, get started. You can do it all yourself, or if you need help, reach out to our onboarding team or our customer support team. You can find me, you can email me directly at Vikas, Vikas at azibo.com. And our podcast, the Hacking Real Estate Podcast, which I co-host with Brandon Hall, the realestatecpa.com, a very prominent CPA and tax pro in the real estate investing community. He and I co-host this. You can find that at hackingrealestatepodcast.com. Or obviously you can find it on all major podcast platforms.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Vikas, for your time. I've learned a great deal and can't wait to check out Zeebo in more detail after this.
Thank you so much. I had a lot of fun with this.